Welcome to Smart English Stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more English stories. James was a young man who lived in a small town. He had a big dream. He wanted to speak English like the people he saw on TV. His friends Amelia and Michael also wanted the same, but they all thought it was hard. They tried many times and failed. One day, James decided, "I will learn English in 3 months." His friends laughed at him, but he was serious. James looked in the mirror and said, "I can do this." His first step was to listen to English every day. He listened to songs, watched movies, and tried to speak like the actors. His friend Amelia would sit with him, and they would laugh at the funny words. She always said, "James, you sound like a robot," but they never stopped trying. One evening, when the sun was setting, James felt sad. He remembered how his father, John, always told him to never give up. His father's words made him cry, but also gave him strength. He knew that if he learned English, he could make his father proud. He wiped his tears and promised to work harder. He met his friend Sophia, who was good at English. She said, "James, don't just learn words. Speak them. Talk to yourself in English. Tell your story in English." James smiled and started doing this. He would stand in his room and talk to himself. "Hello, James. How are you today?" At first, it felt silly, but slowly it started to feel natural. One day, James and Amelia were at the park. They saw a little girl crying because she lost her toy. James wanted to help, but did not know how to say it in English. He felt so bad. That day, he promised himself that he would learn more words to help people. English became his key to being there for others. James then started to learn a new word every day. He would write it down and say it 10 times. His friend Daniel gave him a tip: "Speak slowly, James. It is better to say it right than to say it fast." James took this advice to heart. He spoke each word clearly, and this made him feel good. When James felt scared to speak, he would think of his grandmother, Emma. She always told him, "Fear is like a shadow, James. It looks big, but is not real. Speak with your heart, not just with your mouth." Her words were like magic, making him brave every time he spoke. Amelia and James made a game. They would talk in English for 10 minutes every day. Whoever spoke in their language first would lose. They laughed a lot because they both made many mistakes. But these mistakes became their best lessons. They learned from each other and grew stronger together. James remembered the day he saw his father lose his job because he couldn't speak English well. He saw his father's tears and pain. That memory stayed with him. It made him think, if I learn English, I can help my family and make their life better. This thought pushed him to learn even on days when he was tired. One cold night, James was alone in his room. He missed his mother, Isabella. She was far away, working hard to give them a good life. He wrote her a letter in English, telling her how much he missed her. When he finished, he cried, but he also felt happy because he could now tell his feelings in English. When James met his friend George, he learned another tip. George said, "James, read English stories aloud. It will make your mouth used to the words." James started to read his favorite stories aloud, even when people looked at him strangely. He did not care because he knew he was getting better. James made a new friend, Benjamin, who loved music. They started singing English songs together. Benjamin told him, "Songs are like small stories. When you sing, you learn how the words feel." James found that singing made learning fun. It was like he was learning without even trying. One day, James went to the market with his friend Charlotte. She spoke to the shopkeeper in English. James watched her with big eyes. He wanted to do the same. Charlotte said to him, "James, don't worry about mistakes. Speak like no one is watching." From that day, James spoke English whenever he could. There were days when James felt like giving up. He remembered the words of his friend Robert, "James, every mistake is a step forward. If you never fall, you never learn to walk." This thought stayed in his heart and helped him stand up every time he fell. Amelia, who was now his best friend, told him a secret. "James, talk to your pet in English. They won't judge you." James laughed, but he started talking to his cat, Charlie, every day. He would say, "Hello, Charlie. How is your day?" His cat didn't answer, but it helped James practice. James loved to watch cartoons. He realized they spoke simple English, so he watched them every day and copied their words. He would say, "Oh no" or "wow," just like the characters. This made his English sound more natural. James had a small notebook. He called it his magic book. Every time he learned a new word, he wrote it in his magic book. He read it every night before sleeping. His friend David told him, "Words are your friends, James. Keep them close." One evening, James sat with his friend William. They watched the sunset, and William said, "James, do you know? English is like this sunset. It has many colors, and each color is a new word or idea." This made James smile, and he knew he was on the right path. James then learned another trick from his friend Mia. She said, "Speak in front of a mirror. It will help you see how your mouth moves." James stood in front of the mirror every morning and said, "Good morning, world." It felt silly, but it made him more confident. James remembered his cousin Thomas, who lived in the city. Thomas knew good English, and when they talked, James always felt shy. But now, James thought, I will speak to Thomas in English next time. I will show him how much I have learned. This goal made him work even harder. He practiced speaking with strangers at the grocery store. At first, his voice shook, but he remembered the words of his friend, Olivia, James, "Every hello is a victory. Speak like you are meeting a new friend." Slowly, he felt more at ease talking to new people. One rainy day, James and Amelia met an old man named Paul. He told them, "I learned English at 60. If I can do it, you can too. Just believe in your heart." Those words touched James deeply, and he felt a fire in his heart that he never felt before. James also learned to record his voice. He listened to how he spoke and tried to make it better each day. His friend Arthur said, "James, your voice is your best teacher. Listen to it carefully," and James did, every day, until he felt proud of his own voice. One day, James stood in front of his class. He spoke in English without fear. The whole class clapped for him. He felt like a star. He knew his hard work was paying off. He looked at Amelia, who had tears in her eyes. She was proud of him too. James found that when he spoke English, he could talk to new people. He made friends from different places, learned their stories, and shared his own. English was no longer just a language, it was a bridge that connected his small world to a bigger one. Every time James felt alone, he thought of his mother's words, "Son, you're stronger than you think." He knew English was his way to a better life. It was the light that would lead him and his family to new dreams. And this is not the end of James's story. This is just the beginning. His journey to learn English is filled with ups and downs, joy and tears, friends and family. And he continues to grow with each word he learns and every sentence he speaks. James woke up early every morning with a new energy. He told himself, "Today, I will learn something new in English." He knew it was not just about the words, it was about believing in himself. He made a promise to always stay positive, no matter how hard it got. One day, while walking in the park, he met a girl named Ava. She was crying because she couldn't speak English well in front of her class. James felt her pain because he had been there too. He sat next to her and said, "Ava, don't worry. I used to be just like you. We can learn together." She looked at him with hope, and they became friends. James told Ava about his little tricks. He said, "When you're alone, think in English. If you see a tree, say tree in your mind. If you feel happy, say happy in English." Ava tried it, and she started smiling. She said, "It feels like I'm talking to my heart." James knew that this was another step forward. One evening, James was sitting by the window, watching the rain. He remembered the days when he was too scared to say even one word in English. Now, He could speak to anyone without fear. He thought of his father, who had struggled so much, and whispered, "Dad, I'm doing this for us." James and his friend Charles made a new plan. They would watch one English movie every week. After the movie, they would talk about it in English. They laughed a lot because sometimes they did not understand the jokes. But slowly, their English got better, and they even started making their own jokes. Amelia gave James another tip. She said, "Talk to English speakers online. Find friends who speak English. They will help you learn fast." James was nervous at first, but he did it. He made friends from faraway places. They taught him new words, and he taught them about his culture. James then started a small diary. He wrote about his day in English, even if it was just a few lines. He wrote things like, "Today, I felt happy," or "I learned a new word. This small habit made a big difference." It helped him see his progress every day. One day, his friend George asked, "James, why are you trying so hard to learn English?" James looked at him with tears in his eyes and said, "George, when I speak English, I feel like I'm not afraid anymore. I feel like I can do anything." His words were full of hope, and George understood. James's little sister, Charlotte, was his biggest fan. She watched him practice every day. One day, she said, "James, I want to learn English too. Will you teach me?" He felt so proud. He knew that his journey was not just for him, it was for everyone he loved. When James felt tired, he remembered the smile on his mother's face when he spoke his first full sentence in English. She had hugged him so tight and said, "My son, you are a champion." That memory was his strength on the days he felt like giving up. James found that reading English books helped him a lot. His friend Donald said, "James, read kids' books first. They are easy and fun." James started with small stories and then moved to bigger books. Each book was like a new friend, teaching him more and more. Every night, before sleeping, James listened to English songs. He let the words dance in his mind. His favorite song was the one that said, "Never give up, keep going." He would sing it softly, and it felt like a lullaby that gave him sweet dreams. James's English teacher, Mrs. Olivia, saw his hard work and said, "James, you are a star in the making." Keep shining. Her words touched his heart, and he knew he was on the right path. He promised her that he would keep learning and never stop. One day, James and Ava had a small test in class. They had to speak in English for 2 minutes. Ava was scared, but James held her hand and said, "You can do this, Ava. Remember, mistakes are okay." Ava smiled and spoke with all her heart. When she finished, everyone clapped, and she felt like she was flying. James's journey was not easy, but he knew that every step he took was a step closer to his dream. He knew that English was not just a language, it was the key to his future, the light in his dark days, and the bridge that connected him to the world. When he met his friend Frank, who was also learning English, he said, "Frank, let's make a promise. We will speak only in English for 1 hour every day." They did this, and each day they got better. Their mistakes became their teachers, and their words became stronger. James often talked to his grandfather Arthur. Arthur told him stories of how he learned many things when he was young. James said, "Grandpa, I'm learning English because I want to help my family." Arthur smiled and said, "You already are, my boy. You already are." And as the days went by, James realized that English was helping him in more ways than he thought. He could now help his father with his job, talk to new friends, and even read beautiful books that made him dream bigger. English had become the wings that helped him fly. But James knew his journey was not over yet. He still had many words to learn, many sentences to speak, and many dreams to chase. And he knew that with every word he learned, he was getting closer to a future where anything was possible. He smiled to himself and thought, "This is just the beginning." James sat quietly under the big oak tree in his backyard. He looked up at the sky, thinking of all the words he had learned. It made him feel proud, but he knew there was still more to learn. His journey was like climbing a tall mountain. He had reached many steps, but the top was still far away. One evening he was with Amelia, and she said, "James, do you remember when we couldn't say a single sentence in English?" "Look at us now," James laughed and said, "Yes, Amelia. Now we even dream in English." They both laughed, but James knew that their hard work was paying off. James remembered a day at school when his teacher, Mr. Paul, gave him a task. He had to read a poem in English in front of the whole class. James was so nervous that he felt like his heart would jump out of his chest. But then he took a deep breath, thought of his father, and read the poem. When he finished, the class cheered, and Mr. Paul said, "James, that was perfect." That moment stayed in his heart forever. One rainy afternoon, James met Mia at the library. She was struggling with her English homework. James sat next to her and said, "Let's do this together." They worked for hours, and when they finished, Mia looked at James with tears in her eyes and said, "Thank you, James. You make everything seem possible." Her words made James realize that helping others made his journey even more beautiful. James often talked to his friend Thomas, who lived in the city. Thomas said, "James, learning English is like planting a tree. You water it every day, and one day it gives you shade and fruits." These words stayed in James's mind. He knew that his hard work today would bring him joy tomorrow. At night, James lay in bed and thought about his dream. He wanted to travel the world, meet new people, and share his story. He knew that English was the key that would open the doors to all these dreams. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "I will make this happen." One day, James and his friends were playing a game called English Challenge. They had to speak only in English for the whole day. Whoever spoke in their native language first would lose. James was so good that he won every time. His friends laughed and said, "James, you're going to be an English master one day." James found that English also helped him when he was sad. He would write his feelings in a small notebook, like a letter to himself. He would say, "Dear James, today was a hard day, but you are stronger than you think." Writing in English felt like talking to a friend who always listened. His friend Isabella gave him another idea. She said, "James, start thinking in English when you wake up. Say good morning, world in English." James started doing this, and he noticed that his day felt brighter. It was like he was training his mind to be an English speaker from the moment he opened his eyes. One weekend, James went to visit his cousin David. David spoke English fluently because he lived in the city. When they talked, James realized he could now keep up with David without feeling shy or scared. David looked at him and said, "James, you've really improved. I'm proud of you." Those words felt like a medal to James. James knew that the best way to learn was by speaking, even if he made mistakes. His friend Olivia always said, "James, every mistake you make is a step forward. Don't be afraid to fall, because that's how you learn to fly." James repeated these words to himself every time he felt nervous. One sunny day, James and Charlotte were walking home from school. Charlotte said, "James, I feel more confident when I speak English now because of you." James felt a warm feeling in his heart. He knew that his hard work was not just for him, but for everyone around him. James remembered the day when he saw his mom smile after he helped her talk to someone in English on the phone. She hugged him tightly and said, "James, you have become my little hero." Those words made every struggle, every tear, and every hard day worth it. As days passed, James's English became better and better. He could now watch movies without subtitles, sing songs without missing a word, and even make jokes in English. His friends would often say, "James, you're like a different person now," and he would smile, knowing how far he had come. James often thought about how English had changed his life. It gave him new friends, helped him in school, and made him feel more confident. But more than that, it gave him hope. Hope that he could make his dreams come true. Hope that he could be someone his family would be proud of. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with beautiful colors, James stood with Amelia and said, "Amelia, English is not just a language for me anymore. It's the bridge to all my dreams. Amelia looked at him with a smile and said, "And James, you're walking on that bridge with so much grace." James knew his journey was far from over. He still had a lot to learn, many words to master, and so many people to meet. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had his friends, his family, and all the love and support he needed to keep moving forward. And even though James's story is still being written, he knows one thing for sure: with every word he speaks, every sentence he writes, and every friend he helps, he is not just learning English. He is creating a new future for himself, one that is full of possibilities, hope, and endless dreams.